Hi, my name is George Coles, and I am an avid retro video game collector.
Do a barrel roll!
I have decided to document my journeys as I grow my collection. Please join me as I share with you my finds. Welcome to Retro Game Treasure Hunting. Hi everybody and welcome to Retro Game Treasure Hunting. My name is George Coles, just like the opener said, and we're going to dive right in. We have a couple of pickups that we're going to talk about now. The first of which is a port of a very somewhat disappointing movie. And actually we're going to talk about this in random here. Batman Forever for the Super Nintendo. The sticker's a bit faded, so it's probably coming over hard to pick up. It looks like, maybe it was something that's was in a room that had a lot of sunlight in it. I can't really complain too much for the price I got it for. But let's talk about this. This was a game that I had back in the day. I'm a huge comic book fan. I'm a Batman fan who isn't a Batman fan. And I like these movies. I had a lot of hope going into Batman Forever, and I don't think it's the worst Batman movie. I'm not someone that's a total apologist for it either. I think it's kind of middle of the road-ish. I think there's worse than this. I think there's better. But I digress. We're talking about the game, not the movie. This movie, I remember being better than it is. I picked it up thinking, this was a decent game at a decent price. So I was like, okay, I remember this being decent. I remember enjoying it. I'll give it a shot. So I picked it up, and I brought it home. Played it for a little while. And it isn't quite what I remembered. It isn't as good as I remembered. And I didn't think it was a great game even back at the time. But it definitely doesn't hold up to what I thought it might be. And it did disappoint me a bit. I kind of blame myself on that though, because I haven't actually played this game since it did come out. And my memory kind of deceived me a bit here on this. With that being said, let's jump into our ratings for the game. Graphically, I'm going to give it a 3. It's on par with a lot of stuff that's on the Super Nintendo system. It doesn't push the graphics at all. It doesn't innovate in any way. But it's definitely not the worst looking game I've seen on the system. There's way worse looking games than this, so I really can't give it that terrible of a rating graphic-wise, so I'm going to give it a 3. Gameplay, I'm going to give it a 1. While there's 2 characters, Batman and Robin, that you could play as, or you could play co-op with a friend, they kind of lean a little bit heavy on a fighting aspect, and while that's good, while there's a lot to that, there's a lot of moves you can do, it becomes repetitive really quickly. A lot of the bad guys are the same looking bad guys over and over again. A lot of the power-ups they're kind of plentiful in the game, so it makes it a little bit easy. To me, and there's some wonkiness too. I definitely don't have a manual. It took me a while to figure out how to use the grappling hook, which kind of set it back a bit. And when you do, it's not precise and it's not exact. You kind of have to know what you're doing to do it, and to me that took a detriment to it. That being said, we're going to go into the difficulty. Difficulty, I'm going to give this one a 2. Now, if you haven't seen before, I'm not talking about how overall difficult it is. I'm talking about the difficulty versus the enjoyment. This game's not difficult at all, and the repetitive nature of it takes away the enjoyability of it. There's very few places in the game where you're going to feel like you're stuck or you need help with. So I think you can pretty much power through it pushing buttons and not really have a great experience. Replay value, I give it a 1. I think nostalgia really got to me on this one. I think I wanted it to be better than it is, and that's why I thought it was better than it is, but I don't think it's something that I'm going to pull out of my library and play very often. So I can't say I would play it more than maybe once more. Music wise, I'm going to give it a 3. It's right in the middle of the road. And by the way, I didn't mention this up front, and now I'm 4 or 5 ratings into this. I rate everything on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. I give it a 3 music wise. It's right about par with what you would expect from a Super Nintendo game, so I can't really knock it again for that. Overall, I give the game a 2. I do not recommend purchasing this unless you're a Batman collector, unless you're a Super Nintendo, if you're going for a complete set. Not a game I recommend. That being said, our next game, WWF Royal Rumble for the Sega Genesis. This is an interesting game. If you might have followed my channel, mostly what I do is pro wrestling reviews. I've branched out to include some video game stuff because it's another avenue that I love. But I'm a huge pro wrestling fan, and this came out in, I believe, 93, and it was a really weird period in the WWF. They were kind of moving on from the Hulk Hogan era and going into a new era they call the New Generation. We see a little bit of a mix of both of both eras represented. We had The Undertaker from the new era, Hogan from the Hogan era. Crush is kind of made in both. Lex Luger, one of the guys that they wanted to go for the New Generation. Shawn Michaels, another face of New Generation. Jim Duggan, a callback. Razor Ramon, a new guy. Randy Macho Man Savage, a callback to the generation before. The model Rick Martel, another callback. Papa Shango, who, if you didn't notice already in this video, I'm wearing his shirt. Bret the Hitman Hart, who was one of the faces of New Generation. IRS, who's kind of another guy that's active in both. This game actually, I pretty much buy any wrestling game I see in the wild. I'm that much of a wrestling fan that I want to collect even the bad ones. This actually isn't a bad game. It's not a great game. I don't recommend it like I would with something like No Mercy, but we're going to talk about that now. Let's go right into our ratings for this. Graphic-wise, I give it a 3. I've seen a lot of wrestling games, and especially this era, which the graphics are worse than this. They're not as good as they would come to be, but then again, we have to judge it against the time frame. You know who every wrestler is. They're easily recognized. They have a very signature style. The graphics to it are pretty good for what I would say a 16-bit system could do. Like I said, I'll give it a 3 on that. Gameplay, I'll give it a 2. It's very much a kick, punch, body slam if you're lucky kind of game. You don't need much skill to get past this. It's definitely not like one of the later THQ games, No Mercy, WCW NWO Revenge, WCW NWO World Tour, WrestleMania 2000. Definitely not on par with those. Not on par with a lot of games. But it's okay. I give the gameplay value a 2. Difficulty, I give it a 2 again. You're going to kick and punch most of your way through this. Replay value, I actually put a little bit higher. I give it a 3. I think this is a bit of a fun game. I think you can play this and have fun. Again, if you're not expecting the greatest game, I had a lot of fun with it. I had a lot of fun playing around with the different wrestlers of the era, and I enjoyed it. And the Royal Rumble is one of my favorite pay-per-views yearly that the WWE or WWF at the time produces. Music, I'm going to give it a 4. It's basically a generalized version of the wrestler theme songs, which were really pretty cool, and I some very iconic themes of the time: Hulk Hogan's, Macho Man's, Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart. They all have very iconic theme songs. Overall, musically I gave it a 4. Overall, I'm going to give the game a 3. Definitely not the best wrestling game. Not even in the upper tier. Somewhere middle ground, I would say. I would definitely say it's worth picking up if you're a fan of the Genesis. There's also a Super Nintendo version that has a different roster. I don't remember exactly what the differences were, but each had like 5 exclusive wrestlers, which was kind of cool at the time. So you could pick up that as well if you're only collecting Super Nintendo. It was a fun game. I recommend it to anybody that's a wrestling fan, especially a wrestling fan of this era, who's also a gamer who wants to get back into Genesis or Super Nintendo. But other than that, that's the target audience. So overall, 2 licensed products, two different outcomes. One that I was a little bit pleasantly surprised, and one that I was underwhelmed with. But again, sometimes that's what happens. Nostalgia sometimes takes over your brain. There's movies I go back and watch that I don't like as much now as I did when they came out, or TV shows, or, video games even. So, unfortunately, sometimes that's what happens. We romanticize stuff from our youth that it's possible that this Batman Forever was a game that I got that was the first new game I got in months, and I played it for months because it was the only thing I had that was new. So, again, underwhelming a bit. Maybe I set my expectations too high, though. But basically, that's what I got to say on this. My name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of Retro Game Treasure Hunter.